In the earlier module, we discussed about the conduct phase and the edit check programming and how the ECRF is designed. But this module consists of a major plan which is involved in the data management activity, which is called as data management plan, which tells about the entire activity or the life cycle of the project. So the purpose of data management plan is to describe how the data will be acquired or processed during the study phase, which includes the phase from your startup to your closeout phase. How data will be managed, stored, and what standards will be used, how the data will be handled and protected, and after completion of the study, whether it is in compliance with the final study protocol and the CDMS which are used. All the procedures in this plan will be in accordance with the applicable ICH guidelines, FTA regulations, and CRO standard operating procedures. So this is the only document which is live from the beginning till the end of the project. So this document details about the all activities and guidelines which are in compliance with the final study protocol undertaken for successful implementation of the data management process. So who will start preparing the DMP? So generally, a lead data manager will do the draft version of DMP, but sometimes if a CDA is also a well-trained person, then the same also can be prepare the DMP. So LDM or a project lead or a CDA will start preparing the draft version of the DMP prior to the ECRF designing and any study related activities. So the first step itself is the preparation of DMP, but always the first step is a draft version. So what are the activities are completed during this process? So they include the DMP development. So development of the data management plan and summary of the same. Then you will see what are all the project specific training records needs to be collected during the process. Once the ECRF requirements are finalized, then the same is uploaded to the system. A creation of ECRF completion guideline is required. Once this process is completed, the data needs to be validated. To validate any data, the data validation guideline is also important. So this we discussed in the startup phase as well as in the conduct phase as well in one of our earlier modules. Other than that, a creation of non-CRF data guideline, if applicable, would be created. Data coding guideline, wherever a medical related terms needs to be coded, either it is a medication name or it is a identification name, which is nothing but the disease name. Then creation of QC plan, how the QC activity will be performed in each step of the data management process. That needs to be clearly mentioned in the QC plan. Then planning of database security, how the database is secured, and those requirements also is important in the data management plan. Then execution of data entry activities, how the data needs to be entered. So which includes your data entry guideline or ECRF completion guideline also states about it. Along that, an annotated CRF document also states what type of data goes into this particular page. Then execution of edit checks as well as the query management. SAE reconciliation and data transfer. Not only SAE reconciliation, in case of non-CRF data is there, then non-CRF data reconciliation also needs to be completed. Progress reportings are nothing but extracts of your reports, and as well as a monthly reporting, or as discussed with the sponsor, similar frequency reporting has to be shared to the CRO team as well as to the sponsor team. Then finalization activity. The final QC review will be performed. Database needs to be logged prior to the final extraction of data. Transfer of study documents and the data handling report needs to be completed during your finalization process. So following DMP activities can be divided into different processes like DMP development and summary. Planning or programming. Planning or programming always includes your preparation of your guidelines and rest other activities. And execution comes only when during the testing process as well as during your conduct process. Then finalization activity is your final DB log and final data extraction as well as handling the reports. So the LDM or PL will develop a DMP documents along with the designated team members, because always a plan will not be created by a single person. It always includes a multiple uh, persons, which is also called as your team members. The DMP documents will consist of a series of separate study documents detailing the handling of clinical data. So as we earlier discussed, there are multiple guidelines and plans involved in the DMP. So those names and process would be mentioned in the DMP, but the detailed process would be mentioned only in the corresponding plans. So the DMP documents will be filed in the data management study file, which would be available for review for each and every team person who are involved in the particular project. Along with the DMP documents, expected study start date and end date also should be mentioned in the DMP development, and the timeline for each phase activities also to be mentioned while drafting the DMP. That is the reason so that the team can work accordingly. For example, if you have a time of 3 months for a startup activity, because majority of the documents needs to be prepared during your startup phase. So the defined timelines is also required for the team to work. DMP development and summary report. Apart from the documents specified for various study metrics are mentioned in the DMP, such as what type of database system would be used, project-specific assumptions, and performance metrics like the interim analysis. For example, interim analysis will be performed to identify whether the study is going as expected or not. So for this analysis, all the pages will not be considered. So certain pages will be performed for analysis, and based upon that the sponsor may call or take a call to continue or to terminate the study. The latest version of DMP will be applicable in project from the point it is made effective. If any amendments are to be made, the latest version of DMP will be integrated. The list of all DMP documents, references, and versions will be changed accordingly with the dates and they were applicable. Sometimes, if sponsor needs to be approved the same, then sponsor also will sign the relevant document on the newer version of the same. It is a live document and can be updated at any time during the course of the study. Because during the course of study, there is a possibility of protocol amendments, there is a possibility of medical coding dictionaries could be updated. Such informations need to be incorporated in their respective guideline. So once the version of the same is modified, again your DMP document also will get updated. And DMP will be produced by LDM or PL for a specific study, because it is not, though it is a generic document, it will have its own limitations or details into a specific study. So every study will have its own DMP and its related versions along with the date. The summary report will be prepared at the start of the study and at the completion of data management process. A final DMP summary will be included with the details of final version of all the documents. Then final sign off LDM, PL or sponsor will be taken at the end of the process of project after the data handling report is completed. Initially also it would be signed off, and once all the activities are completed, again a final sign off is also required. So how to plan your activities? So all the activities detailing the programming and designing of the ECRF and other clinical data management system falls under the planning section. So those includes the preparation of ECRF completion guideline, data validation guideline, non-CRF data handling guideline, data coding guideline, quality control plan, database security, preparation of annotated ECRF document. These comes into your planning and programming phase. Creation of ECRF completion guideline. So this we have already seen in startup phase activity as well as in the creation of ECRF and EditCheck's programming module 2. So while designing and drafting the ECRF, this guideline will be planned simultaneously, which will consist all the study step procedure for the CRF designing process and study documents required in the following guideline. So following aspects should be covered while drafting the ECRF completion guideline, but not limited to logging into the CDMS. Under this section, the LDM or the PI or the CDA must provide the access information such as whether any specific web link from which the CDMS will be accessed, and how to create a subject, how the data entry needs to be completed, how to manage the discrepancy, because always a detailed procedure to handle discrepancy raised during the data entry must be described in this section. And already we have discussed multiple times about the data entry. So a detailed procedure of how to conduct the data entry activities also to be mentioned clearly so that the site team or the data entry person who can enter will not have any further confusions. Then investigator sign off. Investigator sign off is a detailed procedure of how the principal investigator or the investigator will electronically sign or provide their acknowledgement electronically into the CRF in the CDMS platform which is used. Then creation of data validation guideline. So the data validation guideline is a document which details the activities that outlines how the validation needs to be completed, which includes the data entry part, the query management part, and the screen UAT as well. So as a minimum requirement, the AD check specification document, which contains all the program consistency checks which are used to minimize the logical possible errors during the data entry, that needs to be clearly identified and mentioned in your how the validation procedure works. The validation or testing for edit checks and screen UAT or screen UI testing is done by preparing the UAT log. So that is called as user acceptance testing log. The procedure for validation would be described in this section. And flow of discrepancy note. How the discrepancy flow will occur. For example, this section tells about how the query is generated and how you can assign it to the relevant user, how the relevant user needs to update the query. Once it is updated and satisfied, then how data management team or the site monitors can close those query. So that section needs to be clearly mentioned. And review of critical data. So the critical data is checked manually to check errors which may not get generated through system. For example, this also includes here review of your SAE form or the adverse event form or any other study related efficacy parameters. Those also needs to be considered as your critical data. The unresolved discrepancies. Some queries may not be get resolved are mentioned here. So whichever are the unresolved discrepancies that needs to be mentioned in the particular. Then non-CRF data guideline. Non-CRF data guideline is a document which consists of handling of the non-CRF data. That is, here an example is given here is the centralized lab reports which in accordance with final study protocol and CDMS used. It may also have several requirements like what format needs to be imported, what will be the medium of transfer, what will be the frequency that the data will be imported to the system, and the data transfer specification document needs to be identified. So other parameters or the sections which comes under this includes your local laboratory reference ranges needs to be uploaded into the system, or central laboratory data, IWRS or IVRS data needs to be imported into the system. Those comes under the non-CRF data guideline. How these data to be handled, such detailed procedures will be mentioned in this section. Then data coding guideline. So this will describe the procedure for data coding activity, whether the guideline describes the auto coding of terms or manual coding, etc. So this guideline will include variables to be coded, which dictionaries are used, what will be the version of the dictionary used, and which sections would be coded, which CRF pages are affected in the coding section. So those would be clearly mentioned, and what would be the frequency of import of data of this particular section will also be mentioned in the data coding guideline. Then planning of database security. So always the database security is more important. So that is the actual pros of a EDC system. So the data management, site personnel, sponsor assigned to the study will granted access for the trial data. So this also includes the CRO team, the site monitors, study monitors, etc. So access is provided by project lead individually and will be documented in the study file. Database security must address and protect the following. That is, the data in the database, which will have an audit trail at what time of the data is entered into the system. If any modifications are performed, which user performed the modification at what time, those would be clearly available. Then data management, database management systems, and any other associated application, a physical database server or virtual database server, and the underlying hardware, the computing or network infrastructure used to access the database. So those are to be secured. The creation of quality control plan. So why quality control plan is required? Because at every section, the person who was independent of the trial should perform the quality control activities. Otherwise, the errors will not be identified. That is the reason a quality control plan is important in the project specific or in the study specific activities. So the quality control plan specifies all the QC procedures planned for various time points throughout a different phase of study trial. So it gives a brief idea that what are all the activities needs to be undertaken, at which particular activity the QC part is important. So acceptance percentage error rate also to be identified and documented in the study specific QC plan and based on the relevant parameters. All findings with corrective action should be documented in a specific logs and forms includes a QC issue log and a QC report. Whenever a QC activity is performed, a QC report needs to be generated along with any issues are identified. QC issue log also to be attached to the same document. As a minimum requirement, the following aspects should be covered in the QC plan. Those includes the creation of ECRF. Once the ECRF is created, that QC activity to be performed. And again, for annotated document also a QC activity is required whether the requirement sheet, protocol and the annotated documents has similar set of questions and all the parameters are included needs to be identified. Then a UAT, QC person also will perform a screen UAT as well as an edit check UAT as well. Then query management, SAE reconciliation. Whenever a reconciliation process occurs, a QC team also will reconcile the documents and they will identify if there are any issues are there. Other than that, those includes the medical coding, data transfer, non-ECRF data handling, etc. Critical field QC and final QC also mentioned in the QC plan, and always critical field QC will should not have any error. 100% QCs are required. The execution activity in DMP. So what are all the activities that comes under the execution part? So the programmed and designed activities will be tested and executed according to the guidelines created in this section. Those includes your data entry would be performed against the ECRF completion guideline. Edit checks and query management, which will be verified against your edit check specification document. Then creation of SAE reconciliation guideline, progress reporting, creation of data transfer guideline. Data entry. This we have already learned in the previous module too. A detailed procedure of how to conduct data entry in the CTMS. So it shows that a detailed procedure of entering the CRFs to accept the valid data as per the properties of the question asked in the CRFs, as well as entering the CRFs with a different layout also must be described clearly. So other than that also a detailed procedure of amending the saved CRF along with the reason for change should be mentioned in this section. Sometimes if the CRF is marked as completed, then how to modify the data with providing a reason for change for the same. Section. Then edit checks and query management. Edit checks are nothing but rules or checks which are programmed to raise discrepancies if the data is not valid or accurate as per the study protocol. This varies from project to project. The data entered in the EDC is validated for clean, correct, complete and valid data as per the study protocol. So it will tell about the detailed activities on how to handle the discrepancies raised while performing the data entry, and how the query also needs to be managed in the CDMS platform which is used. And it also tells about how to modify the data and how to update the discrepancy nodes, or the query needs to be resolved in this section. Essay reconciliation creation. So this guideline tells about how the data which is captured in the study database should be consistent or similar to the safety database. It tells about the procedure how to reconcile the essays reported or identified during the trial recorded in the study database with the essays recorded in the safety database. The sponsor-specific recommendation regarding reconciliations will be incorporated in a detailed procedure, and at what frequency the essay would be reconciled also clearly mentioned. So in case if the follow-up is happening on any particular essay, and this document also tells about till which particular point the updated data would be available in the EDC system also needs to be mentioned, because sometimes the physical form will have an updated data while EDC platform will not have such information. So at which particular point the data will be updated in the system also to be clearly mentioned in the essay reconciliation guideline. Then creation of data transfer guideline. So how the data needs to be transferred, those information to be clearly mentioned, and to whom the data would be transferred, who are the relevant stakeholders in such process. So that will be clearly mentioned in the data transfer guideline. So what will be mentioned in this guideline? The programmer will validate the data transfer by executing the details as per the guideline procedures in the test environment. If any errors are identified during the transfer of data in the test environment will be identified, and amendments will be made to the guideline. And electronic data transfer specification document also prepared, which tells about the data transfer file and who would be the authorized signatory, and who would be responsible person for the sign off of the same. Progress reporting. So reports are nothing but the list of extracts or reports comes from the system. So those includes general reports includes STV and PI sign of status, missing forms, query site-wise information, STV status summary, and individual CRF reporting. Other than that, also there could be some sponsors expectation. Those would be added to the progress reporting, and the progress reporting will have its set of frequencies also, at which particular date or which particular frequency that needs to be shared to the sponsor or other stakeholders also to be mentioned clearly in the documents. Finalization activities. What are all the final activities in the data management process? Those includes a final quality review, creation of database log, and data handling report creation or updating to your data handling report. Planning of database log. It is a document used to describe the procedure for carrying out DB log, including interim analysis for a specific study. Prior to DB log, what are all the activities needs to be completed? In case of interim analysis, the subjects which falls under the interim analysis needs to be logged, because to avoid further modifications of the data into the system. So that needs to be identified. Then ECRF must be marked completed. So in case of interim analysis, it may not be necessary that PI sign off is required, but STV is required for the same. And in case of final DB log, PI signed off with all queries resolved and closed is an important factor. Then all the coding data also must be completed. All essays to be reconciled. No more pending activities are allowed post DB log. So permission to log the database will be agreed by sponsor, statistician, lead data manager or a project lead, and a database log form must be completed and signed by the relevant stakeholders. Creation of data handling report. This is the document which would become available during your finalization activity. Is used to report any deviations from the processing guidelines for a specific project. It also include outstanding queries, the data issues, update of coding dictionaries during the study, deviations from the following DMP, terms which could not be coded using medical dictionary, those also to be identified in a data handling report. Other than that, the data transfer issues deviated from your data transfer guideline. So those things to be identified in your data handling report and the same to be signed off by lead data manager, project lead or biostatistician and any other relevant stakeholders. The review and approval of DMP. So who is going to review and approve the DMP? So the data management team, that your LDM or PL or CDA should circulate the draft DMP among the needed stakeholders to seek their input. Once the inputs are identified, if they are relevant, they need same to be incorporated into the relevant suggestion and circulate the final draft to the sponsor for their review and finalize the document based on sponsor comments. Once the sponsor accepts the document, it is signed off by the DM team as well as by the sponsor team. DMP may be revised based on final study protocol amendments and changes in study procedures or plans. Revision also could be made and the same to be circulated internally and then forwarded to the sponsor for their review. Once it is reviewed and approved, same would be released. So, in the meantime, DMP summary also needs to be updated appropriately as per the revision of the respective document and same needs to be signed off. After sponsor approval, DMP must be signed off by sponsor and other assigned designee as per the study specific requirements. So this particular slide shows the exact process how it works. So for example, LDM or PL will obtain sponsor study documents. DM team will start prepare the draft version of the DMP. So it will go for internal review within the team. Then if there are any comments, again DM team will implement the comments and incorporate the changes. Once the changes are incorporated, again it will go for internal review. If there are no comments, that particular draft will be shared to the relevant stakeholders. If the stakeholders also has comments, then again the team will implement the comments and incorporate the changes and they will do the internal review again. If there are no comments, again it will be shared to the stakeholders. If there are no comments from the relevant stakeholders, the DMP will be approved and same will be updated throughout the study cycle. Thank you.